Second speaker of this morning session, and I'm very glad to introduce Professor Konstantin Anokhin, who is the director of the Institute for Advanced Brain Studies at Lomonosov Moscow State University and a member of the Russian Academy of Sciences and a very renowned neurobiologist. Professor Anokhin proposed an important theory of cognition and consciousness based on the idea that the brain has a particular structure called Cognitome, a neural hypernetwork consisting of neuronal groups with specific cognitive properties, and I guess this will be the topic of his talk today. But let me say something more personal and playful here, because Kostya and I shared early work some years ago, well, more than we would care to remember, in England on highly respected topic at the time, that is learning and memory in the chicken for a brain using paradigms such as passive avoidance learning and imprinting. And then we lost touch for several years, busy possibly with other things, until recently we met again, discovering a common interest nowadays for the topic of consciousness. So I realized that clearly it is a short step from chicks to consciousness. The title of the talk is Cognitome on the algorithmic emergence of the mind by proliferation of cellular cognitive groups. Thank you, Kostya, and floor is yours.
Talking about short step from chicks to consciousness, that reminds me an expression of Conway Lloyd Morgan, philosophical chick. That was one of the objects of the study of this famous psychologist. I am very grateful for invitation to speak at this meeting, and not only because to give a large talk, but because of the scope and the title of the meeting, because two words there, cog and ever, have been the major areas of my interest for many years. So that's a great honor and pleasure to speak about this. Contrasting this to the question of consciousness, there is now a great interest and attention to the issue of consciousness, and with high reason, because as John Searle, for example, put it, it is a problem number one of the first importance, because nothing is important if you are in coma or a zombie. And we've been with a number of people in this audience to a whole series of meetings on consciousness. I returned from a meeting on the science of consciousness in Barcelona. Nikki Clayton came from the ACC, Association for the Scientific Studies of Consciousness meeting in Crete, and three of us with Georgia were at a small conference on the natural consciousness in Galapagos Islands earlier in June. But what I would like to focus today is a different perspective, which I has been taking for several decades. Consciousness plays an important role and the final challenge in this perspective, but the major question is different. And to go through this, I would like to go back to the initial setup in the Western culture and philosophy. As Alfred Whitehead noted, that 2.5 hundreds of Western thought were dominated by a genius and ideas of one genius, René Descartes, who famously noted, "I think, therefore I am." And here is where the idea of consciousness comes from. First, of course, when he was saying thinking, he was meaning very different things, not only reasoning, but also sensing, feeling, desiring, as he writes, by all these, I mean cogitare, cogito. So consciousness becomes a key player in this logic based on the following transitions. We are interested in what means to be us. Who am I? But in order to understand this, thinking in a broad sense, feeling, being sentient, being consciousness, is a kind of a route to understand who am I and what does it mean for a cognitive organism to be. What is a cognitive being? However, as Miguel de Unamuno noted, the defect of this logic lies in the resolution to empty himself of themselves, of Descartes. The truth is, he suggests, the opposite one. I am, therefore I think. And then the key question becomes, who am I? And that is the main question I'm trying to address in my quest. Who are we? What does it mean to be a cognitive being? What fundamentally differentiates those accumulations of matter in the universe to which we apply the term who instead of what? Is there a general biological principle which guides the establishment, formation, and existence of such organisms, of such agents, of cognitive beings? So within this framework, I made the title of my talk, which consists of several key terms or ideas. The first one I would like to focus is the strange dissociation, which is strange because it is ignored, of mind and consciousness. There are two words in many languages, not only in Western, in Eastern philosophy as well, that seem to be interchangeably used in the recent decades or centuries. Though the usage was obviously for some reason because people are applying this differently. There is no one word, but there are two words in German, in English, in Russian, in Spanish, in Italian, in Hindi, in Buddhist terminology, etc. So what is it behind? And I would like to suggest that there is a real difference between two phenomena which we have to look and find the scientific background for why the people are intuitively using these two words for separate entities. Number two is explicit allusion in the title of my talk to the title of the origins of species. It is the difference between the Darwinian versus Cartesian approaches to the question of mind and consciousness. Cartesian neuroscience is largely neuroscience which is dominating presently the issue of mind-brain problem and neuroscience. It is correlational neuroscience. When you start from the assumption, like Juliet Anoni says, axiom, that only thing which we are certain of is our consciousness and our subjective states. And let's look for the physical basis. Darwinian approach is different. It takes a historical route. It asks how it is possible that from nothing at the level of phenomena which we are interested, for example, mind and consciousness, comes this phenomena. Can we trace the principles of how that emerges? And this is what I would like to do in my talk, and that is the main task for what I'm trying to find out. Can we have this Darwinian approach and apply it to the origin of cognitivity, starting from the biological systems which are not conscious and have mind, so which are not cognitive yet, and how from this type of organization of matter in the evolution of universe and Earth, there appears a cognitive organization, which we know, by the way, happens each time when a child is born, from physiology to psychology, and not only child, but a great variety of animals to which we attribute now the presence of mind and consciousness. So it is a deterministic process which has to be studied, and my approach is to do it in Darwinian historical way, evolutionary in a broad sense, where evolution is meant various types of development. The third keyword, algorithmic. The variety of the mental agents, of cognitive agents, it's so large as we more and more realize presently, that obviously, because of the great variety of substrates, nervous systems, organizations, there should be some underlying principle, and it has to be rather simple to be general. Cellular cognitive groups. I will mention them later, but what I would like to stress at the moment is that the basic idea of the theory I'm working on is grounded at the cellular level. It is both systems level and behavior of the whole organism in its interactions with the environment. But what I can see, if I'm right, from the theory is, without knowing how the processes at these systems behavioral level are organized at the cellular level, including the neuronal plasticity and memory, it is not possible to grasp these principles. Psychology alone, philosophy alone, or a reduction this to physics explains nothing. And Cognitome, the result of this evolutionary or developmental process. Thank you. Probably it is necessary to switch this one, because there is a kind of a resonance. The main idea of the theory is that any cognitive agent to which we attribute who instead of what, bears a specific organic structure within this agent, which defines its subjective experience, memory, and relations at the maximal level of its existence with the environment. Cognitome should be read in a similar way as genome. It is a material structure bearing particular emergent properties, functional properties, which describe the cognition. So this is the outline of what I am going to speak about. Mind versus consciousness. I already mentioned the main idea behind this. I will just try to use a metaphor or analogy to address what I'm trying to achieve with this distinction. Identifying mind with organic structure might be like looking at the mind as a specific organized structure, biological structure, like sun, while consciousness is a specific type of process within this structure. Having this specific structure will produce no type of specific processes in this. So the structure comes first and defines many processes in it. The approach, therefore, which I am taking is first to understand what is the structure, which we are missing still to understand. And then with this step by step to see what is the dynamics in this structure, what is the traffic with this specific structure, including subconscious mental processes, cognitive processes, and a specific process of consciousness. And viewing the mind as a structure has a number of advantages. You can ask the questions: what is its nature? How it is built structurally? How did it originate? And start mapping it, and finally go to dynamics, which are specific to this type of structure. So mind is a separate entity in my view, which should not be confused with the consciousness, which is a process. Darwinian versus Cartesian approaches. I mentioned that most of the approaches in the current neuroscience are Cartesian approaches, correlational one, looking for neural correlates, and even theoretically looking for physical basis of existing consciousness. One notable exception, of course, was a great biologist, Gerald Edelman, with his ideas of neuronal group selection, neural Darwinism, populational thinking. But I would like to focus today on a different route to this Darwinian thinking, which is important in the way my own thinking was developing under influence of background of what I knew. It is about Darwinian roots in the Russian neuroscience. And here I want first of all to pay tribute to a great neuroscientist of the 19th century who is not well known in the West. Though if Nobel Prizes would have been awarded at his life, he deserved at least two of them. One, experimentally, while working with Claude Bernard in Paris, he discovered the inhibitor reaction in the central nervous system. So besides the excitation, he experimentally showed in frogs the inhibitory processes in the central nervous system. And few years later, working in Germany, he discovered, again experimentally, the phenomenon of the plasticity of the nervous system by neural summation of impulses applied to the electrically to the frog nerve to contract the muscle. And he was very clear to immediately capture that this is the physiological mechanisms for many forms of plasticity, including memory. But his important contribution into Russian physiology, and even not only physiology and culture, was his famous work, which steered a lot of cultural events and scientific events in Russia, which was called an attempt to introduce physiological foundations into the mental processes. So he was the first physiologist to propose a program how to study this objectively. It was so against the thinking at that time that it was banned by censors under this title, and it has to be, it was published under the title Reflexes of the Brain. He extended these ideas into a number of other works, and actually, being a physiologist, he was the first president of the president of the first World Congress of Psychology, which was organized by Ribot in 1981 in Paris. An evolutionary part of this, he was the scientist who translated a number of Darwin's books, and it is interesting that his translation on the expression of emotions in human and animals was published earlier than English translation, because Darwin sent his proofs to Russia, and Sechenov translated it, and it was published before the English edition in the UK. What he wrote in one of his key papers, Who and How Should Develop Psychology, was that scientific psychology cannot be anything other than a series of teachings in the origin of mental activity. So it is the issue of evolution. The source material for development of mental facts should be as the simplest mental manifestations in animals and not in humans. So it is approach biological and evolutionary again. Physiology presents a number of data that establish the relationship of mental phenomena with so-called nervous processes in the body act purely somatic. So the issue of attempt to find the neural basis of mind. And one very important is idea that it can be quantized, so that mental act as process of movement has a different beginning, course, and end. And this must be retained as the main principle to study, going from the elements of this. It was Sechenov whose writings inspired young Pavlov when he was still in seminary to go to university into physiology, and after many years of physiology of digestion and receiving Nobel Prize, he finally arrived to the main question which he was interested in, how the matter of the mind produces subjective experience. And his idea was conditioned reflexes, the molecules of mind, as he called it. But I would like to switch here to a different route and history to go further in account of the Russian traditions. In a very nice book, which I enjoyed a lot, Georgia, the final chapter of it tells the story which I rarely now brought actually to attention and remembered, the discussion between the Konrad Lorenz and American group of psychologists, including Daniel Lerman, Schneerler, Tobak, and others. And the Lerman critique was that many of the things which Lorenz treated as evolutionary preformed and innate can be actually a result of learning in over before the birth by different practices of neural activity like Xing-Yang Guo suggested in 1930s. Lawrence puts that perspective in the following way in his account of how the ethology was born in his book Foundations of Ethology. He traces back the origin of ethology to this event in 1935, when he gave a lecture at Harnack House in Berlin to Kaiser Wilhelm Society, which is now a Max Planck Society. Its theme was based on the article, The Concept of Instinct, Then and Now. And what he writes that during the course of that lecture, I did cover completely and with a special emphasis all those characteristics and capacities of fixed action patterns which could not be accounted for by means of the chain reaction theory, that means reflex theory. Yet, in my summary at the end, I still concluded that fixed action patterns depended on the linkage of unconditioned reflexes. That was a tension. I should say here, a tension which was accumulating and present in 1930s, not only through the work in ethology, but for example, through work in lesions and studying the particular roles of different brain structures, like in Lashley studies of reflexes, which he finally had to abandon and to go to equipotentiality. But that's the continuation of what Lawrence wrote. Sitting next to my wife in the last row of the auditorium was a young man who followed the lecture intently and who, during the exposition of spontaneity, kept muttering, "That's right, that's right." However, when I came to the concluding remarks described above, he covered his head and groaned, "Idiot." That man was Erich von Holst, and after the lecture we were introduced to one another in the Harnack House restaurant, and there it took him all of 10 minutes to convince me forever that the reflex theory was indeed idiotic. Here is Erich von Holst at that years, young von Holst, and here they are at the beginning of 50s when they became co-directors of the new Max Planck Institute established to study both the ethology and physiology of natural behaviors. During these years, in 1950, von Holst and Mittelstadt proposed a famous reafference principle, where instead of reflexes, the nervous system, through the number of blocks of organization which I showed here, going from Zn, Z2, and Z1, leaves, before making an efferent discharge, leaves a copy of this discharge, which is, after the action has been taken through the reafference, is compared to actual outcome and fed back to the higher centers. What Lawrence continues then in his account So it happened that neither one of the older ethologists nor one of the instinct opponents posed the pertinent question about how it was possible that whenever the organism modified its behavior through learning processes, the right process was learned. In other words, an adaptive improvement of its behavioral mechanisms was achieved. And he knows that as far as my knowledge goes, P.K. Anokhin was first among the theories of learning to grasp the conditioned reflexes as a feedback circuit in which it was not only the stimulus configuration arriving from the outside, but more especially the return notification reporting on the completion and the consequences of conditioned behavior that provided an audit of its adaptiveness. And then he writes that independently of that, he published his ideas also in '61 in first German version of monograph, and then in '66 in an enlarged English book, Evolution and Modification of Behavior, to which Giorgio refers in his book. This is not completely accurate historical account. Obviously, for Lawrence, it was like that because they met with Anokhin in '61 at the Conference on Brain Mechanisms of Learning in Montevideo, but the story was laid down much earlier. Within the Pavlov school, the main idea of Pavlov was a reductionist idea. He was a strict physiologist. And in today's terms, he was adherent to mind-brain identity theory, writing that the main initial concept for us is the Cartesian concept, the concept of reflex. It is quite scientific since the phenomena it designates is strictly deterministic. And you have to point by finger where was excitation, where it goes in the nervous system, etc. And if you will imagine this, you will understand the full force and truth of that doctrine of conditioned reflexes. Within his school, in his laboratory, there was a young rebel, Peter Anokhin, who came to study the same question which Pavlov was interested in: what are the material physiological bases of mind? And working with Pavlov and being also attentive to what is going on in other fields, in the embryo physiology of how behavior is developed, in neurology and localization of functions, in the experiments on the plasticity of Hans Bethe and others with transplantation of nerves and anastomosis. He gaining finally an independence, and Pavlov recommended him as a chair of physiology at the Nizhny Novgorod University. He started writing that more and more facts are accumulating that absolutely cannot be squeezed into the rigid framework of reflex theory and require more dynamic and comprehensive understanding of the mechanisms of nervous activity. And through various types of experiments he carried with his co-workers at the Department of Physiology chaired by him, he came with the idea which was opposite to the theory of reflexes, the idea of functional systems. And though it was initially discovered with the experiments on the plasticity of nerve centers under different transplantations of muscles or neuroanastomosis, it was motivated and was channeling, as Anokhin wrote, even the most complex forms of higher nervous activity can be explained in terms of general neurodynamic principles revealed to us in the study of the plasticity of nervous centers. And here are various types of experiments which were carried as a background of this. And as a result, in a large, thick volume, which was the principles of interaction of center and periphery in the nervous activity. There was an introduction of idea first of functional system and the reference principle. It was called return afferentation in Russian, обратная афферентация. And as you can see here, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter. As you can see here, it is the same idea of what is going on during a decision for particular action, including conditioned action of leaving a copy to which the reference comes and is being compared, or here it is a mismatch and beginning of a decision for a new principle, which was expanded later on. So, well, thank you very much. The functional systems theory has been developed into many neurophysiological directions. One of them in 60s was the study of neuronal basis of what is going on in the nervous system during integration, and the idea which was called the integrative activity of neurons. So not only integrative activity of the nervous system, Sheningtonian one, but that neurons are having a huge convergence of various types of information, and it was studied experimentally in cats, in rabbits, in dogs with the neurophysiological recording. So it can be sensory information, multisensory. It can be from different bodily organs. It can be integration, multimodal integration, and it can be also the reference copies which are fed to the neuron, cerebral cortex neurons, and what is going on also intracellularly. One of the very important extensions of this work was the work in 1970s of outstanding, I would say, genius Russian neurophysiologist who passed away, unfortunately, too early, who, by studying the activity of single neurons during behavior in various animals, in rabbits here, has found that the activity of these neurons can be specialized towards the subjective experience which animals acquired in these particular learning conditions. For example, this is the neuron which is active only when the animal is pulling the ring. There are two rings, so it's pulling the left ring in order to get food in the left feeder. And this neuron is special for the activity only of the left ring, but not on the right ring. And here is the neuron which is active only when pressing the right pedal, but not pulling the ring, and nothing happens on by pressing the right pedal, the other pedal. And so there is a whole universe of specialized, cognitively specialized neurons, which could be specialized only due to acquisition of personal subjective experience, since animal never experienced in its ecology such things as rings and pedals. which made Cherkov to conclude in the book which was published posthumously that the fact that nerve cells in different areas of the brain, and they studied many cortical and subcortical areas, are specialized not in relation to any processes or functions, but in relation to elements of subjective experience, which makes a possibility to study the subjective experience through the neurobiological approaches objectively, recording and finding the rules for this. That was the time in the 80s when I came to these labs, and my initial interest was finding the genes which are expressed and involved in long-term memory. We found several of these genes. One of these is shown here, which are expressed during development in the nervous system, but then in the adult brain, they are silent until the conditions of new experience and learning appears, and then they are very rapidly turned on. And if to prevent the expression of these genes using, for example, antisense oligonucleotides, the animals learn normally, but long-term memory is not formed, it is impaired. What immediately came to our attention is that this can be used as a tool to map objectively not individual neurons, but the whole populations of neurons which are forming new functional systems. So within the circuitry of the nervous system, which is filled with the different functions and functional systems which are already established and are expressed through the spike activity, there are certain neurons belonging to a larger population of neurons, which upon the introduction of new experience start to express immediate early genes. And by using molecular tools, you can identify what are these populations of engrams, which depends on NMDA activity, has no background, many advantages. So we started mapping with this tool different new experiences, and this is just a reminiscence of our early chick work, which we started with Gabriel Horn, mapping with immediate early genes. He was very interested in this. The circuitry which is involved in imprinting in chicks. And you can see here it is actually medial ridge filled with the expression of C-force in many areas, including hyperstriatum, intermediate medial hyperstriatum ventrale, which was the area which was identified by Gabriel Horn group, but many other regions. Because it was difficult, that was done by in situ hybridization, radioactive in situ hybridization. It was difficult to do this. We moved to techniques to make the mapping by endogenous GFP construct with the C-force promoter, and to do this we developed technologies to make the brain optically transparent, to visualize it with the three-dimensional microscopy with the cellular resolution, and that is one of the first reconstructions we made in 2008 of hippocampus expressing C-force in cells involved in a single trial Pavlovian conditioning learning. Later on, we extended and developed this into much better resolution. So here you can see also the resolution at the cellular levels. And other groups started to develop the similar techniques of optical clearing. Diderot and others, so it is quite widespread. We also started to use the genetic constructs to label permanently the circuitry which is involved in a particular experience, and to introduce there not only fluorescent proteins to see this circuitry, but also the molecules which can either report the activity of these cells by calcium genetically encoded sensors, and to manipulate them optogenetically with the channeler rhodopsin containing molecules which are sensitive to light. So we are currently using these approaches with different in vivo mapping, and here you can see the population of cells which was labeled at the time of learning, so they are identified functionally as involved in this associative learning, and we can follow their activity, reconstruct these cells, and measure the activity that later on as responses to different kind of events to see how these interact. And also making optical imagings with miniscopes of these cells, etc. So the final part, algorithmic. As I mentioned, besides these experimental approaches, something is necessary at the theoretical basis. And starting from 2012, I was developing the framework, the conceptual framework, which addresses the following three questions. What should be conditions additional to the principles of natural selection that are minimally necessary and sufficient for the emergence of cognitivity in Darwinian organism? Question number one. What are the mechanisms then that underline this transition, the emergence of cognitivity? And what is the essence of the final result of the work of many cycles of these cumulative mechanisms? How we can understand what is the cognitive system? So graphically, it can be displayed saying that we are looking for the conditions which are present at the level of biology yet, not cognitive, but are the first principles necessary for the cognitive transition, the emergence of cognitivity. And finally, we would like to understand what is the result made through this cognitive transition. What is the nature of cognitivity? So why, how, and what? And the main idea is that it is possible to add to the principles of natural selection simple basic principles, which are at the moment three in the theory, which suggest that if we have the Darwinian organism involved in the struggle for existence in the environment, and if this organism has generative functional systems, that means is able to form new adaptations through functional systems which were not present in pre-established evolutionary when the organism was born. If this generation occurs in the deep integrative network, that means in the neural network which is deep enough so that in the deep layers of the network, the neurons are receiving, as I showed you previously, the multi-biological convergence of many different previous stages of integration and processing. And if the nodes of this network have long-term cumulative plasticity, then according to prediction, the organism should develop gradually the complex cognitive organ. So the principle is the same. If you have initial basic conditions and if you have an algorithm, then repeating this work of algorithm with the help of the memory, which is similar to the genetic memory in Darwinian system, can gradually and slowly give you accumulation, producing very complex cognitive organisms with the high diversity. So the theory goes through several stages. I understand that I have too finish soon. So the key idea of the algorithm that there are three loops of emergence in the nervous system. And here I refer to the level of the cognitive processes at the cellular level, because without this it is difficult to understand it. One is composition of new functional systems, so the generation of novel and novel functional systems. And this is an upward emergence. But the key moment is that if functional systems overlap on the same neurons, different functional systems, and this same neuron, by accumulation of involvement into different cognitively specialized functional systems, start to form differentiated properties which are common to these functional systems, and becomes a functor, element which start to possess elementary function at the lower level of organization. I will illustrate it in a moment. And from these neurons and groups of such neurons, there is a third process that their reintegration by synchronization binding can produce very complex cognitive scenes. So as a simplified illustration, if you have a functional system 1, someone interacting with a girl with this nice red head, and the number of neurons are involved in this. If you have then at the other time, which can be quite a different time because of the long-term plasticity of neurons, you have an interaction of this person with a girl with a red rose. It will involve one neuron which is in common, which will acquire the property of discriminating red as a common property of these two functional systems. And at different levels of the organization of nervous system, this specialization can be sensory, emotional, goal-related, depending on the brain area. So this is, in brief, the theory. I mentioned cognitive groups. They are dubbed as cogs and logs. One of the features of the theory is that it suggests that at this higher order level where groups start to interact with the cognitive properties, the links between groups are not axons traveling from one center, one group of neurons to another, like Pavlov believed the conditioning reflexes are made at linking to associative centers in the cerebral cortex through the axonal connections. But it is an overlap of different cognitive groups on some common neurons, which by that and long-term plasticity becomes like a wormholes, hubs that if they are activated within one of these groups, their activity can decrease the threshold of activation of other groups, part of whom they bore in the previous history. And this is termed links of cogs. So the final conclusion is the framework which is called neural hypernetwork theory, which suggests that the organism as a cognitive system consists of cognitively specialized elements. So it is a feature of the organism. If you want to know whether the organism is cognitive, and you have to look inside, and one of the tools is if the organism has the elements in it, in the direct manner in the nervous system, but it can be a different organism, which are specialized towards relation of the organism with the environment, which are individual and subjective to this organism, and it's part of its experience. This is an organism which is cognitive. And with these elements, they are concentrated in a particular areas of the central nervous system with a different organization of central nervous system, which form a cognitive organ of the body, cognitome. It has specific structure and cause-effect power, which mathematically is approximated by the concept of neural hypernetwork, part of the mathematical theory of hypernetworks. And within this framework, the mind in its most useful, pragmatic understanding, if you take the vocabularies in English, for example, how the mind is used, is identical to this higher order structure with its specific causal properties. And these are the properties of mind. And the consciousness is one of the processes which goes on within this system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Anokhin, for this marvelous talk. Thank you in particular for the historical account, because he reminded me once more of the validity of the principle of André Gide, you know, the novelist who said in French, tout chose on dit déjà, mais quand personne n'écoute, il faut toujours recommencer. Translated means more or less that all things have been already said, but given that there is nobody listening, you have continuously to repeat and to repeat. Anyway, questions, please.
Hello, thank you very much for the talk. I wanted to ask you something about the development of cognition, the one you touched, and its relationship to evolution. I found quite fascinating the similarities between the evolution and the evolution of cognition itself. But I was wondering, if you have enough plasticity in the brain, according to this theory, it could be possible, or at least I can imagine an organism that starts as less cognitive and become more cognitive in the time. So if it's detached from evolution, could we imagine an organism that develops cognition during its lifetime, given enough plasticity and enough time? Or is this thing still necessarily connected, in your opinion?
You mean an organism which develops plasticity in its ontogeny?
No, develops cognition during its lifetime. Because if the organism is plastic enough...
This is the main point of what I was trying to say. That the organism which is initially laid down as a physiological system and the nervous system develops without any so far cognitive activities, passes through the transition to minimal cognition, the primary cognition, which is present at the time of birth, and you can even know there were many experiments in the School of Functional Systems for the preterm born babies and experimental manipulations with the learning in ova, so that many of these functional systems are consolidated and ready even before birth. This is a minimal repertoire, arsenal of functional systems. From the moment when particular functional systems consolidates and starts to use the internal architectonics to achieve the results of its activity, and there are mismatches in the possibility to achieve. So some novel factors which are coming, either which are triggering this activity, or that it is necessary to find a new mean of achieving the same route. A new daughter functional systems are generated, and this is a tree which is growing based on the plasticity. which generates a repertoire of secondary functional systems, and on intersections of these functional systems, on the neurons which were involved in the different types of systems, there are dissection of elements which were present in both or 3, 4 functional systems, which attain already a cognitive property or second order cognitive property. They can be included then in these functional systems to parameterize the stimuli or the results, because now you can virtually see that it is a table or a chair or a cup and include it into the functional system. So the short answer, yes. The key idea is that besides evolutionary origin of cognition, which we are all interested in, but it's very difficult to achieve through experimental studies besides comparative studies, you have an excellent example of how cognition appears from simply biological or physiological background into developed and very differentiated cognitive organisms, which is at your hands in the animal and human cases.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I'm here. So I have, I think, more philosophical question, I would say. So many neuroscientific theories have avoided the use of the mind to avoid falling back into the dualism mind-brain, you know? I don't know why.
Probably I have to move away from you, sorry. Yes?
Okay. And anyway, the cognitive model puts back the mind, and but connecting it to an algorithm and a biological structure. So I was thinking, what really distinguishes the cognitive model, the cognitive model today from what we traditionally call mind? So is it the cognitive model an overcoming of the dualism, or is it a more scientifically way of talking about what we usually call mind? So I don't know if it is clear or, okay.
Cognitome in formulation and formalization of the theory has the symbol of M, and it is not only mind, but also memory, and also model. So what is contained in Cognitome as a physical organic structure. The term physical is wrong here because it is cognitive structure, but it is has a material basis. That is what I'm trying to say. Is that it bears the phylogenetic and ontogenetic memory of individual cognitive being. It has the model of the brain of the world, and to be more accurate, not the model of the world itself, but the model of interaction of this organism with this world. And it is based on memory. So within the theory explains how 3 forms of memory, semantic memory, procedural memory, and episodic memory are mapped onto the 3 groups of cognitive populations, which I said, functional systems, qualons, the groups of neurons which are at the intersections, and halons, which are integration of these qualons into different scenes and can be laid down as episodes of memory. It also describes how the associative memory, 3 classical types of associative memory, is explained as links between these cognitive elements. So I will not answer your question from the position of all cognitive science, but from my own position. The substrate of cognitivity can be studied, it is transparent, and the tools which we are having in neuroscience allow to study how it is formed and what are its organization.
I have a question about the distinction you drew between process and experience in relation to neuroactivity. So at some point you mentioned that neuroactivity is a reflection of experience. But do you mean that in the sense of experience being necessary for neural activity to develop as a sensory representation, and then once it has developed, you do have neurons representing processes, or is it that at all times they're representing experiences? So for example, let's take visually selective neurons in an anesthetized cat or monkey. When we record from these neurons, to us they seem to represent processes, not experiences. The animal is anesthetized. And are you claiming then that the relationship between that neural activity and the activity that those neurons produce during experience is radically different, or that the former requires experience in order to develop that, and after that it does represent processes?
Several aspects of your question. First, about the activity and the properties. According to theory, the structural properties, the development of new and new cognitive groups in hypernetwork, which means that hypernetwork is growing, there are more cogs and there are more locks between them without any additional growth of the number of neurons or connections at the basal level, at level n. So n plus 1 is growing. It is growing during the activity. So in this scheme, the cognitive activity within functional systems, within behavior, drives cumulative formation of new properties. So it is a dynamic interaction. This is number one. The second aspect of your question, to which degree this specialization is present or absent in the classical cases of, let's say, visual neurons discovered by Hubel and Wiesel and other data in the analytical neurophysiology. The answer is that what we see with traditional neurophysiological recording approaches with the presentation of different stimuli in anesthetized animals is an impoverished part of the specialized groups of neurons. So they receive lower convergence, but still are active in a special way. So if you take the visual cortex, they develop the stimulus selectivity or binocular selectivity, and we know that in different species, like for example in cats and versus in ferrets, this is to different degree is predetermined by the development and to different degree by the experience. We know also that the same happens for very complex cognitive specialized neurons, which can still be detected in anesthetized animals after prolonged training. Like it was shown in monkeys in the medial temporal lobe neurons when the monkeys were trained to different artificial shapes, geometric shapes as stimuli. And then under anesthesia, you can see that the neurons are starting as a part of this individual experience in the adult life, start to respond to this. But these are parts, I would say, the reflex pathways, which are very narrowed because of anesthesia. So if you take the awake animal, which was shown very well in Shverkov experience, for example, you will find the visually selective neurons, for example, neurons which are selective to stripes of different orientation also. During the operant behavior of this animal in this environment, in the motor cortex as well. And actually in the motor cortex, there are more visually selective neurons than in the visual cortex. And in the visual cortex, there are many neurons which are related to motion. So when you have the whole brain in a conscious systems level integration, the situation with these specialized neurons becomes much richer, and this is where you would like to study it with the modern neuroscience techniques.
Okay, so thanks for your speech first. And so basically, I'm not 100% sure if I understood correctly the essence of your theory. So I wanted to ask a little bit more to clarify, because actually, I will tell a story maybe first. Once I was talking with ChatGPT, and I had a very deep philosophical discussion with it, and I asked it a question. What's the thing about humans which is obvious to a machine, but we don't realize it? And what it basically said is that we are actually composed of many very separate processes, even if we're talking about like our mental states, and we actually kind of make one thing out of it. We kind of like unite it, but actually they're very separate processes, and the only thing which makes them compound together is like some phonological loop which we have inside of our minds. And kind of in a sense, how I understood Cognitome theory is that it also tries to kind of like divide all of our consciousness, all of our mental states into like separate groupings which are separate systems, and only then they are somehow united. Is that a correct way of thinking about it?
In a certain sense, the neural hypernetwork theory is an extended functional systems theory. It follows the roots of the functional systems theory. And what was addressed in the functional systems theory is how what is the unit of integrative activity of organism. It is not a reflex, then what it is and how it is organized. And then the next idea, which was put forward in the 30s, that the organ is a combination of many functional systems, like a Swiss Army knife, adapted to different systems. And it was said at that time that but there is a problem of how all these different functional systems within the whole organism make a unity. So make a whole organism as a system. And this question was not addressed in the functional systems theory explicitly. It was studying individual functional systems, how their genesis, their operational architectonics, feedbacks, etc., etc. So in a sense, Cognitome theory says that though we have individual adaptations and individual adaptive acts which are organized as a conjoint collective activity of many elements, not only central nervous system, but periphery into achieving these results. There are some links which makes me, me. So there is something who am I as a whole, and how it is made. What the theory suggests is that besides different functional systems, because of the overlap of these systems on a great amount of elements, which are called functors in this account, the collection of different functional systems becomes entangled as a whole. And through these hub elements, which were involved in one functional systems at one age of the organism, and in another at a different age, etc. But being activated, they can make a kind of percolation of activity to and access to the rest of the functional systems. We are having this glue which makes different elements of integrative activity a high-level entity of a whole cognitive organism.
Yes, thank you for this talk. So we heard first about the state of the art, now we could hear a bit of history. But I got a bit confused because in the beginning you were speaking about the mind and the consciousness, and then you were talking about the cognitome. So you introduced the history of this reductionistic approach. If you put the sum of the little elements together, something appears. So for me it's more interesting to see, do we need consciousness for cognition, or where is the separation between this, or can there be cognition without consciousness? At which time point in the evolution, if you want, so do we need consciousness, and what would be the selection pressure for this?
One short answer. Consciousness within this framework let me put it in this way. The first definition of consciousness was made by John Locke in 1690. And consciousness, he defined, is a perception of what goes on in the man's mind. Within the framework of cognitive theory, consciousness is how the whole cognitome, through this percolation, through these wormholes, perceives, that means receives, there is a reception of the global states of activity, cognitive activity within this system. So there are three elements. First, you have these integrated halons, which are synchronized activity of many of the cognitive specialized elements. Second, there is a receptor for this, the whole cognitome. And the third, there is a specific process of the access, which in this case is a global access. That means that within your particular experience, which you have as a scene, it not only the specialized functional system, for example, for getting the food related to the particular environment, but all other different types of functions and functional systems are hearing and listening this scene and can make a decision from this complex combination of qualia. That makes, according to theory, consciousness very adaptive in the interactions of the organism with the environment through all its experience.
Just to follow over my question, about your distinction at the start between mind and consciousness, I had the impression, you know, my obsession with the distinction put forward by the Scottish philosopher Thomas Reid. Yeah. And so I wonder whether the mind consciousness could be equated to perception and sensation sense to Thomas Reid, but actually probably not, because if I got it correctly, for you, mind would include as a structure the processes of not conscious and consciousness processes, right?
Yeah, you're correct. The cognitive processes in Cognitome and neural hypernetwork are going on also in unconscious domain, and we are able to perform a lot of forms of cognition due to the differentiation of these cognitive elements, but this is cognitive already, not physiological, but it is not necessarily conscious.
Thank you. Is there any other question? No, if not, I think we can say thank you again to Professor Anokhin for
Thank
this
you very much.
wonderful talk. And we will see at 2:30 2:30 for the afternoon session. Please be straight and thank you, Kostya. It was wonderful.
Thank you very much. I think it's necessary to recharge it because